Hello, fellow true crime enthusiasts, and welcome back to the channel on an all-new extra report. This extra report is called Gypsy Rose, the damsel in distress, who is Daniel Glidewell, aka Dan. Well, before Nickolas Godejohn, there were multiple men before him, and one name in particular, and one man named Daniel Glidewell. And we're going to get into it in full detail in this video. If this sounds interesting, please stay tuned. Gypsy Rose Blanchard will have us believe that she was never allowed to leave the house, she never went anywhere, and she never had any friends or a social life. In 2010, Gypsy attended VisionCon for the second year running, this time with her cat. Decked out in denim, the cat, not Gypsy. What a terrible shelter life. Abused and imprisoned Gypsy Rose Blanchard led. Even her cat got to go places. That same year, Gypsy was rewarded with an honorary membership to Squad 66, an official squad of the 70th Explorers Garrison, a branch of the 501st Legion, a group with strong links to VisionCon. Squad 66 gained its first honorary squad member, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. There was not a dry eye in the crowd at the closing ceremonies as the little girl with such a big heart gave her momentous acceptance speech. The 501st Legion are a group of Star Wars enthusiasts who dress up as characters from Star Wars and attend events to raise money for charity. Little girl Gypsy was rapidly approaching her 19th birthday at the time of this presentation. As far as it's known, Dee Dee didn't run into any Gypsy problems at VisionCon 2010. Or perhaps Gypsy, captured on a video at the VisionCon 2010 after party, decked out in a pink wig, screeching into the camera whilst wheelchair dancing, "It's my party wig!" was more careful not to get caught. Official court documents released in 2025 released a FOIA request revealed Gypsy admitting in a Facebook message to Dan that in 2010 and 2011, she sent 4 men aged between 35 and 50 topless photos of herself and told them she will have intercourse with them. It's while attending VisionCon 2011 that Gypsy claims she met her friend Dan Glidewell, a then 36-year-old father of 2 children who was on probation for drug-related offenses. Gypsy alleges, "I told him vaguely about what was going on at home. He told me, you just pack your stuff, and come live with me in Arkansas. And I said, okay." Gypsy says this in Mommy, Dead, and Dearest in 2017. In 2018, Gypsy recalls, "I trusted him," her then friend Dan, "a little bit enough to run away from home. He didn't have a place of his own, so he was staying with a friend." Gypsy says this in Gypsy's Revenge in 2018. So we're guessing the money from Dee Dee's purse would have been a great help with that. No place of his own situation, wouldn't it just? Gypsy has always claimed that she was too afraid to reach out to anyone for help, but clearly Gypsy did reach out. Gypsy reached out to men, and some men took the bait. It has been discovered pictures of Gypsy at an old VisionCon website. They were taken at a 2010 VisionCon event known as Masquerade. Gypsy is all but toothless and looks 12 years old, if that. Draw your own conclusions as to what some men saw on her. Dan Glidewell claims in a message he sent to a friend in 2024 from his authenticated Facebook profile that he didn't agree to run with Gypsy. Conversely, one of Dan's friends says Dan was going to go to Arkansas with Gypsy, but there's a big difference between go and run away. For the record, adults leave home. They don't run away from home unless they're trying to appear small and vulnerable and childlike, which Gypsy does a lot. In our opinion, based on our research, Gypsy did not run away on the night of Thursday, 21st, April 2011. Instead, plain and simple, Gypsy went to see Dan. Interestingly, Gypsy publicly revealed the date she ran away after we had already reported on it. Damage limitation. Gypsy has always led us to believe that the control and abuse she allegedly suffered at home precipitated her running away. But evidence and facts dictate that Gypsy didn't run away. Gypsy went to see. Because on the night Gypsy alleges she ran away, Dan was laying in a hospital bed in Springfield, nursing injuries following a bar fight. If you were planning to run away from home, would you do it when the person you're running away with is lying beaten up in a hospital bed? It doesn't really sound feasible that a man allegedly beaten up by 3 men, hospitalized with a broken back, will be asking any girl to run away with him. It doesn't even sound like running was something Dan would have been physically capable of. In her 2024 memoir, Gypsy is still stuck like glue to the running away myth, even though it's patently obvious she went to see. In 2017, Gypsy says, quote, "I stepped out, got a ride from a stranger, and went over to his place," end quote. At Nick's trial in 2018, Gypsy simply says, quote, "I left the house and I met up with one of my friends," end quote. But Gypsy didn't run to his place. Gypsy ran to Dan's hospital bed. According to many reliable sources, Gypsy took off to the hospital with $1,000 of Deedee's money in a bottle of oxycodone, which is an opioid pain medication. Dan may well have welcomed some strong pain medication. What better way to reel him in? Dan alleges in official court documents released in 2025 following a FOIA request that he invited Gypsy to go to the hospital because he was in pain and needed comforting. Did he need comfort from Gypsy or comfort from oxycodone? Dan claims in an official court document that Gypsy arrived at the hospital with a very large suitcase and a 3-ring binder of multiple forms of identification to prove she was over 18 years old. Gypsy, quote, "It was about a good span of time between, I want to say 2021 and 2015, that I really wasn't sure of my age." I repeat, multiple forms of identification. It has been floated around that Deedee, aware of an ongoing relationship of sorts between Gypsy and Dan, may have arranged for Dan to be beaten up that night, or that Dan's beating was a direct consequence of his relationship with Gypsy. We have found no evidence to support a theory that Deedee instigated the assault on Dan. A friend of Dan's claims that the beating was a result of Dan's relationship with a different woman he was involved with. We know that Dan was a semi-pro Muay Thai fighter, which likely explains why it took 3 men to overpower him that night and bounce him around on his head like a pongo stick. Now, Dan's mother and her partner did live in Arkansas on a farm. Dan's stepmother, somewhat coincidentally, made a Facebook post in the days following Deedee's murder about her goat, Gypsy's triplets, with a reference to disabled folks. But Dan also had a son in Springfield who was born in 2011 and was just over 2 months old when Gypsy ran away. Dan also had a daughter born in 2002 to a different woman, but apparently he wouldn't learn that he was the father of this child until many years later. Would it be likely that Dan would be willing to abandon his young son and his life in Springfield to start a new life 300 plus miles away in Arkansas with Gypsy, a girl almost half his age with genuine health conditions? It's possible. Dan would later dispute the paternity of his son, so maybe Dan was looking to flee the difficulties surrounding that. Dan was also married, but separated, from a woman he didn't have any children with. But Dan was on probation when he claims he met Gypsy, which ruled out leaving Missouri. In short, Dan's life was a bit of a mess. Dan was actually the one who needed rescuing. Here's what we think. It has been claimed by two of Dan's friends that Dan didn't consider himself to be in a romantic relationship with Gypsy, although Dan acknowledged in a court of law that there was a sexual one. It has also been claimed that Gypsy was bestowed with Dan and claimed Gypsy supports. In our opinion, Dan's beating suggests time out from Springfield was very likely a good idea, but that may well have been an idea planted in Dan's head by opportunistic Gypsy, desperate herself to escape the conflict at home created by her obsession with a man old enough to be her father. If there's one thing a narcissist sociopath like Gypsy doesn't like hearing is the word no. And we bet Gypsy was hearing that aplenty at home. If there are two things a man with a criminal conviction for possession of and dealing rugs, off work with a broken back, couch surfing likes to hear is, I have $1,000 and I have a medicine cabinet at home bringing with over prescription pain medication. But there is little evidence to suggest that moving to Arkansas was a plan for that night. Gypsy is being honest, but liberal with the truth when she says she got a ride from a stranger, which kind of suggests she may have hitchhiked her way to Dan. In reality, Gypsy walked about 3 blocks from her house, seemingly unconcerned that anyone from her neighborhood would see her walking, before knocking on the door of a complete stranger's house and asking them if they would give her a ride to the hospital to see her sick boyfriend, which, somewhat bizarrely, they agreed to do. The complete stranger then takes Gypsy to the hospital, and at some stage, a beaten up or beaten down Dan hobbles out of the hospital with just about what he likely didn't need at the particular moment in time, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And if Dan thought that was bad, little did he know, overprotective Mama Bear, Dee Blanchard, was hot on Gypsy's trail. Go Dee. It's worth noting that statements have been made by people living in Gypsy's community that Gypsy was often seen out and about, minus her wheelchair and minus Dee. But because Gypsy was offered and accepted a plea deal, she avoided a trial. So these statements never saw the light of day in a court of law. They need to. In 2017, Dr. Phil asks Gypsy, "Did your mother ever catch you walking?" Gypsy replies, quote, "A couple of times," end quote. Dr. Phil, "What did she do?" Gypsy, quote, "She got so upset with me, she would punish me so bad. Like, she started hitting me with a coat hanger and telling me all kinds of mean things." End quote. Gypsy says this in Mothers Know Best in 2017. In the same interview, Gypsy says of Nick, who she first starts talking to 3 years after meeting Dan, he, Nick, was the first person I ever told I could walk. Oh, Dr. Phil, you got so played. We all got played. It goes without saying that Dan knew Gypsy could walk. It goes without saying that a lot of people knew Gypsy could walk. The wife of the man who gave Gypsy a ride to the hospital stated that Gypsy had, quote, begged, end quote, her husband for a lift to Mercy Hospital to see a beaten up Dan. Yeah, you heard that right. Mercy Hospital. Gypsy's literal second home, where Dr. Stale and Flasterstein treated her and labeled her a victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And there was their victim, casually strolling through the dark corridors of their hospital in the middle of the night, wigged up, clutching opiate medication, in a wad of Deedee's cash to meet up with her boyfriend, who was twice her age and in violation of his parole condition, having been in a fight. What do you got to say about your victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy now, Dr. Mark Fieldman? Gypsy was asked in 2018, quote, "Did you ever consider in a public place, if you stood up out of your wheelchair and walk, Deedee's fraud would be completely exposed?" End quote. Gypsy answered, quote, "Honestly didn't think about that." End quote. Interviewer, quote, "It never crossed your mind?" End quote. Gypsy, "No." Unreal. Gypsy tells us, "Within like 4 hours, my mom found me at his place," talking about Dan, "because we had mutual friends in common. So she was threatening to call the cops on him." Gypsy says this in Mommy, Dead and Dearest in 2017. In 2018, Gypsy claims it was friends Dan was staying with who called my mom and my mom came to get me. Gypsy says this in Gypsy's Revenge in 2018. In 2024, Gypsy changes her story entirely. Quote, "That night, my mother had awoken probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, noticed that I wasn't there. She then goes to look around the house and my cell phone fell out of my backpack." Okay, yeah. "So she sees the messages between me and Dan and she instantly knows who I'm with. Then she begins to call their mutual friends from the convection. And one of them told my mother where I was." Two conflicting stories given by the same person about one single event. A tenant staying at the house Gypsy was taken to stated that Deedee had turned up at the house, threatening Dan with legal action on the grounds that Gypsy was a minor, but the source said that Gypsy had ID to prove she was an adult. Gypsy told people at the house that Deedee was controlling, and the tenant says Deedee and Gypsy had got into a heated argument before leaving. Note that Gypsy describes Deedee as, quote, "controlling, not abusive." Removing your young, sick daughter from the arms of a beaten-up, much older married man with 2, possibly 3 children, neither born by his wife, and each with a different mother, and a drug-related criminal history, who was on probation and all but homeless, cannot be considered controlling behavior by any stretch of the imagination. It has to be said, great work, Deedee. Another tenant at the house, who has reported vastly conflicting stories over the years, was contacted in 2024 and was willing to talk about Dan. This source ended the communication when they were asked why they had tagged a Gypsy Rose in a 2011 Facebook post that mentioned FetLife.com. FetLife.com is a social network website that serves people interested in BDSM, fetishism, and kink. Gypsy claims that not only did Nickolas Godejohn introduce her to BDSM was something she had never heard of before meeting him in October 2012. Are we supposed to believe Gypsy was randomly out of nowhere steered in the direction of full-on BDSM website in 2011? Gypsy herself reveals little about what happened in the alleged 4 hours she says she spent with Dan. According to Aaliyah Woodmansey, Gypsy's neighbor, Gypsy told her, "Can I tell you a secret?" back in 2011. Gypsy said, quote, "I ran away from home. I met a pedophile online. He took me back to his friend's place and made me sleep in his bed, but when he got handy, I freaked out." Freaked out, but didn't leave until Deedee arrived hours later, correct, Gypsy? 4 years later, Gypsy forgets she had told that story and says it was Dan who freaked out when Deedee told him that she was 15. States, so he freaked out because he was 36 at the time. Gypsy says this in Gypsy's Revenge in 2019. Dan knew exactly how old Gypsy was. Dan more than likely freaked out because he was on probation and didn't want the police involved. Gypsy finally admitted in 2024 that she wasn't a virgin when she met Nickolas Godejohn. This information was only forthcoming after most of us had worked that out for ourselves. Thank you very much, Jib Dip. The facts are, Dan knew Gypsy was of legal age. Gypsy knew she was of legal age. Gypsy knew Dan knew she was of legal age. Dan's friend knew Gypsy was of legal age. They also knew in 2011 that she could walk. But David and Kimberly Blanchard did it? If Gypsy had wanted to remain with Dan, she could have, and Dee Dee couldn't have done anything to prevent it. Perhaps Gypsy was just too intimidated by Dee Dee to oppose her demands that she leaves, which makes no sense at all, given that she hadn't been, Rod's words, scared shitless when it came to walking outside on her own in the middle of the night or knocking on a complete stranger's door and asking them for a ride. Even Ted Bundy had a door to knock on. In all honesty, Dan was probably pretty relieved when Gypsy and all the drama she brought him left. Gypsy loves to promote the idea that bad Dee Blanchard, the monster lurking under every child's bed, didn't want her to find love. But stepping in and rescuing your daughter from predatory married men with children is what moms do. Wanting to subsequently face off with them in a parking lot with a hammer in your pocket, which is an event Dee Dee allegedly invited Dan to attend, is unacceptable, but somewhat understandable. It's what some fathers would do, which in Gypsy's case was Rod, which in Gypsy's case was always Dee Dee. Dee Dee wasn't denying Gypsy the freedom to find love. Dee Dee was vetting Gypsy's objects of desire and was doing a good damn job at it. Dr. Fieldman, he who diagnosed Dee Dee, a deceased woman he had never met with Munchausen by proxy, describes Gypsy's life at home as the control was total, in the same sense that the control of a kidnapped victim sometimes is total. Her, Dee Dee, daughter was, in essence, a hostage, and I think we can understand the crime that occurred subsequently in terms of a hostage trying to gain escape. End quote. He says this in Mommy Dead and Dearest in 2017. No, Dr. Fieldman, we can't understand it. Hostages run towards safety. Hostage, Gypsy, ran towards Dan. With all due respect, Dr. Fieldman, sit the fuck down. Gypsy knew what she was doing sexually. Gypsy claimed in her 2024 memoir of lies, My Time to Stand, and not mention toothbrushes, that she was a virgin when she met Nickolas Godejohn in 2012. It sounds like Gypsy wasn't even a virgin when she met Dan GLIDEWELL. Where Gypsy spent the night, he would testify the next morning they woke up to find Gypsy's mother, Dee Blanchard, in the house. But Gypsy claims she was only at Dan's house for 4 hours. But Dan's sworn testimony suggests it was an overnight stay. Gypsy also told Aaliyah Woodmansey that Dan was a pedophile who made me sleep in his bed. Gypsy sent him, Dan, nude images of herself, including images of herself masturbating herself with a toothbrush. The clock's ticking, Gyp. The truth always comes out. This video is sponsored by, well, you. Whenever you like, comment, and share, that gets these videos seen in the algorithm. And I want to thank you so much for everything. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I'll see you soon with an all-new video. Until next time, please take care of yourself and be safe. Bye.